Welcome to Geek Philosophy, where we love geeky wisdom. If you're new to the channel, my name's Brian, and with me today we have special guest. We have Carrie joining us. Hey, Carrie, good to see
Hello.
you.
Good.
Uh,
Good to see you. How's it going?
yep. Going well. We will get into all that. We'll give a little bit about our background and all that stuff in a few minutes. But if you're joining us and you are, following us along with the Guardians of Getica, you know what we're talking about today. But those of you that are brand new, I will give you a quick overview as we get into this, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So, what we're going to be talking about today is Guardians of Getica, which is a campaign subsetting that you could use for games like D&D or Pathfinder or really any tabletop role-playing game. The difference here in this, and the reason that we're calling it a subsetting, is that it exists within your current setting, whatever game you're playing right now with your friends. However, this is sort of a game setting that is designed specifically for kids and families, and the idea here is that the kids of the realm and the elders of the realm are the heroes, because they're the only ones that can perceive of or remember the frights, which are this sort of unseen menace that's been going around the land. And the regular adults can't perceive them anymore, they don't remember them anymore, so it's left up to the kids and the elders to really handle this menace of frights that are plaguing the land and really keeping everybody safe in doing so. So the Guardians are this cover identity for a group of kids. The Royal Academy is the school that they are based out of, and some of the elder professors are helping them with their adventures, and which are in a large part field trips that they go on to go fight the frights and bring peace back to those that didn't even know what was going on, really. So this is sort of a basic overview. If you want to know more, we've got a whole playlist of this as we're developing this campaign, or campaign settings, so you can go in and check all that stuff out. You can also join our playtest. If you join the playtest, you'll get access to our playtest materials, which include the basics of the setting and also the adventures that we put together to kind of help you do this at your table. We've already got people playtesting all over the country and really all over the world. We've got some people internationally that have been playtesting some of these games. So that's what's going on with all that. But really, these working sessions have been me sort of flying solo with those of you that were joining us in the chat, and then like getting feedback from everybody from playtesting. And I would have people like Crystal that would be on as well, who's been helping playtest here at our house. But behind the scenes, during most of this, Carrie has been helping me with a lot of things, like putting the website together that we just were showing. That's our first version of it. We'll be, working on that as we go, but also a lot of the art that is going to be involved in this. And it's really going to be an art-heavy project, I would say. And so because of Carrie's background, he was the first person I thought of. Although, man, we've known each other since like 8th grade. So you're usually the first person I think of when I think D&D or anything else anyway. So yeah, it's good that we actually get the chance to work together on that. So that was a long intro to what's going on. Today, we're just going to be showing you behind the scenes of what we've been doing. But Carrie, I thought it would be cool if we could just kind of talk a little bit about your background, why I would reach out to you at all. Like, what's your art background like? Just to kind of talk about that a little bit for everybody, so that they know where all this kind of comes from. What kind of work do you do when it comes to the art stuff?
Yeah, well, even before schooling, right? Basically, I grew up on comic books, right? So I used to be drawing comic books quite a bit. When we played D&D, pretty much when we met in 8th grade, right? We started playing D&D right around
Yeah.
that time. So that's when I started drawing fantasy art. So kind of drew characters as my most, my favorite thing to do growing up. And then so I converted that to a degree in art at UCF. So I got a bachelor's degree in art. I like D&D, so I liked medieval history. So I also dual majored in history as well. So graduated there and then converted that to, professionally as a graphic designer, which converted to web designer. So I've done that most of my life. So I've always done illustration in the past, but I've been probably more prolific in the past, 5 or so years than I probably was during my 30s. So, yeah, so I mean, a long history. It's fun to go back and look at all the work that I've done. when I was that young, and then redraw those pictures or just see how far come. I mean, with digital tablets today, I mean, it's like
Oh man.
leaps and bounds. Like what you can do now is like, exponentially better than what you could back then. But sometimes I like to get a pencil out, an old paper and
Well,
pencil.
it's funny, like all the stuff like now, if we had back then, it would have been a different story, right? Like um none of well, first and foremost, tabletop role playing games were very niche back then. Like there were a handful of people that we knew that played, and there were a lot of people playing, but like there was just small pockets of people playing everywhere, right? And fantasy still was not as big as it is now. There was no Lord of the Rings movie yet. Like that didn't hit big. There was no Harry Potter yet. There was none of the stuff that made, I think people today just kind of take for granted that there are tons of fantasy shows and books and everything else. And there were a lot of fantasy books back in the day, but there was not as much mainstream stuff. So like, there weren't as many things, like you said, for digital art back then as there are now, but also people knowing about and playing and like materials for gaming and D&D and stuff just wasn't around. We spent most of the time either at the comic book shop or at the B Dalton bookseller in the mall looking for like gaming stuff or whatever, right? Like trying to find things.
Yep.
So yeah, it's just this different time, but it's cool that that stuff is out there, right? Like the fact that we can even do this is just mind blowing to me. Like, I just would have never imagined us doing this now. So pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny to thinking about when you first got me into role playing games in eighth grade. I remember not being interested in D&D at all. I like wanted to play the futuristic games. Remember we started on Cyberpunk. I
Yep.
was like wholly disinterested in anything like medieval fantasy. Like I like The Hobbit, that cartoon, I saw that in third grade. That kind of made me like love fantasy really my whole life. But I don't know, for some reason it didn't translate to video games. I mean, to role playing games. And then, yeah, I don't know when it turned, but once I think Rifts probably, we played Rifts too, or I was into
Yeah.
Rifts at the time. So that maybe was a pseudo transition because it was kind of like, fantasy elements with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, now that I couldn't think. I'm kind of uninterested in those games now, and now I'm all into medieval
You're
fantasy
all in on
types.
the Tolkien-esque stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I become yeah. So I went through a period, right? Everyone did when they're kind of snooty. I was very narrow in what I liked fantasy
Sure.
wise,
Me
but
too.
you know,
Yeah.
as more people get into it, yeah, I mean the definition of fantasy gets broadened. So
No, that's definitely true. Well, the other thing too is like there was also, I thought, this parallel between comics and this type of stuff. Like most of the comic stores had this one little bookshelf that had like role playing game stuff on it. Like, and there were some people that were playing in the back of the comics. Like, it was a game shop slash comic store, at least where we were, where we rode our bikes down to to the comic shop. What was it? Oh man, well, the first one was Final Frontier. Was that the first one that we went to? There was another one too.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, man.
It's
Yeah, so shout out to
Orange
Final
Park Comics and
Frontier
Games.
owners, whoever you
Yeah,
were.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, man. That's good. I
Yeah,
remember
it's
when it was Orange Park Comics and Games. I remember I got in
yep.
trouble in sixth grade because X Force #1 came out, and I was like, I really want to get X Force #1. So I told my mom, I was like, Mom, I'm gonna go get this. She's like, if you ride your bike down to that shop, you're grounded. And I did it. I just rode down with Tony Valerio. Me and him got on our bikes. We rode all the way down college. Went to the comic book shop, got it, came back, and I told her, and yeah, I got grounded for a month. So
Yeah. I mean, and it was a pretty good. That was a pretty good bike ride. That was like,
yeah,
it wasn't like a few miles down the street. Like you were riding for
yeah,
a while to
yeah,
get there.
yeah.
So,
And there's no
yeah.
sidewalks or nothing, right? So we're just
No.
digging in and out of ditches. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, and for those of you that don't know, the area of Florida that we lived in, where we were from Florida growing up, so the area that we were living in, it's not like if you're picturing people driving through a city where like it's easy to get from one location to other on their or riding on their bike getting there, it wasn't like that. It was very spread out. If you didn't have a car, you weren't getting anywhere. Like this area was very much like you drove everywhere. It took at least a half hour to get anywhere you wanted to go. So like, yeah, getting to the comic shop was a chore. If you didn't have a car and you didn't have a ride, you basically had to ride your bike wherever we were going. So yeah, it's funny. And the other thing I think was awesome too is the fact that like you and I kind of connected over both. Like we were both into comics, we were both into this kind of stuff, or at least this the larger genre of like sci-fi fantasy. But once we started playing, I remember like it was, spending our time drawing our characters. Well, really, you drawing the characters for everybody at that point. Like you drawing everybody's characters. We had like whole almost comics inspired posters. Like at the time, it was a really big deal. Like when X-Men came out, they would have a fold out thing inside of comics where it would show like a poster of all of the different characters like on the team together, and we had those for our comics or for our D&D characters. We had like one on your wall, and I remember in your room that was like all of the different characters that everybody was playing, a few of the NPCs, but most of them were all your characters, your brother's characters, other people that played. I don't know, it was really cool, like just looking back and see how that turned out.
Yeah, man, it was.
What people don't know, and I can tell right from behind, is like behind you in the background is the same world, pretty much. It's taken some evolution that we played on forever. Like, I mean, just like it started out from one little town, and then it just kept growing, and that world's been around since basically early 90s, right? Like it's in one shape or form, and it's just evolved since then. So yeah,
I'm going to show you.
Let me change. I'm going to bring up. We're jumping ahead a little bit because this is you can see some pencil work that Carrie's done here, and then we're going to talk about like some of the progress. And I'm just we're giving it just an intro just to let you know who we are a little bit as we're going through this. But
I'm going to switch.
I wonder if
I'm going to switch. Oh, actually, I got a digital version of Abris that I can show them if they're interested.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, let's do it. So here's our team shot that we're going to get into later. He's been working on, so Carrie's going to give an update as we go. But once he gets it ready, I'll pop it over on a large screen too. But yeah, like what's cool about it now is like in the era of like shared universes, like with Marvel being as big as it is, and like everybody else trying to do a shared universe. To me, like our campaigns were the first shared universe. Like we had like all these like missions that we would run together, and like I was just squeaking by as a DM back then. Like you just trying to figure out best you could. I did some horrible stuff, horrible decisions, but like over time you get better. But it ended up being this. Here's the cinematic universe of our D&D game here. So yeah, let's take a look. Man, it's so awesome.
So there's Simpac. That's the first town we played at, right?
Yep.
So we had Simpac. These are names from yours. So when it started out, remember we had Simpac, we had Tallport, and then
Mistfield. I think.
There's town Asper that I actually didn't put on here. I don't know where it goes yet. But so it's Simpac, Tallport. A lot of the stuff is just named after your characters, man. Like Castle Dun, that's Dunraven's Castle. Just random NPCs, that you played on.
Hawkenshire.
So Hawkenshire. We played here, and then that's just kind of. It's funny, 8th grade you start just picking away at this stuff, and now, I mean, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I would never have thought that I could do this. It was all like a pencil drawing. I used to print it out on my printer with all the words on it, and then I would carefully draw and color pencil around it to get the world map. Now, I mean, I can kind of do whatever I want, Oops.
Well, not only you've done this, but you've also been helping people out with their own character art, and I don't know if you've done any maps for people yet, but like this is. I'm going to need a map, Carrie, so at some point, but it doesn't necessarily have to be as detailed as this one, but we're going to need something. So everybody out there is now going, oh man, like if this is what we can do, like we may not need to go this level, but we'll definitely have really good stuff. I love how it's sort of because you also have that history degree, like you were able to kind of understand how all these things really should fit together. So as they were being refined and built over time, you were able to sort of make sure that they fit from a cultural perspective, even though it's fantasy cultures, like just being able to make it fit in, I just think is amazing. So This, in my
Yeah.
perspective, even though we were all playing on it, this is definitely your world at this point. Like, you have definitely made this, its own thing. You're the one that should have all the credit for what it turned into.
No, yeah, yeah. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. But yeah, it's definitely very cultural. I've got kind of Viking-esque cultures, Celtic cultures, Germanic kind of cultures, and then like classic Tolkien-esque. It's derivative in a lot of ways, but intentionally so. You want to
Sure.
play cool stuff that you grew up playing. You don't almost don't want to change it too much. You want it to be inspired by the stuff that you liked growing up. So yeah, kind of building up. But I dig it out every now and then. And I'm actually never thought this would get done. I worked on it for so long, and I would change things as it evolved. But it's to a point now where it's kind of in a steady state. So every now and then I'll dig it out and just add a couple towns just for fun. But yeah, overall I'm
Well,
pretty happy with it.
what's awesome is like there's some things that you were doing like early on that like I run into this too. Like, I think every dungeon master that runs a game and also watches something like Critical Role or some other live stream, especially Critical Role, because of all this great stuff Mercer's done. But like, you'll come up with an idea and you're like, then a show will happen with a very similar idea, and you're like, oh, now everybody's gonna think I'm ripping off them. I promise I didn't. I did this first. And you and I were talking, like, you've done some stuff, and then all of a sudden, like, Game of Thrones gets huge,
Yeah, man,
and
I'm on it
like,
right now.
it's a very
Like
similar
Kellen
thing,
Vale. Yeah,
Yeah,
like
let
Kellen
me jump
Vale.
back
I mean,
over.
this predates Game of Thrones, at least when I read it. So it would have been I would have been
Right.
in maybe ninth or 10th grade when I made this. So Kellen Vale, I love this area, and then yeah, so he's got like the Vale, and they call it the Vale.
Yeah.
I called this the Vale. So now I'm like,
Yeah.
can't really do that anymore.
Well, that's the thing, right? Even if maybe he had it predated it, like, from a timeline perspective, but you didn't know about it. Like, that's the thing.
Yeah,
Like, it
yeah, yeah.
wasn't on your radar. If he wrote it, you didn't know. So, but I think that's also like, it kind of shows that a lot of this stuff is great minds thinking alike, and we come to some of the same conclusions because we're all inspired by some of the same stuff. So that's why when things feel derivative sometimes, it's because most people, it is like, most people are using what inspires them, and it kind of turns into that. So even this campaign setting, like, I've talked about it before, and I make no claims that it's not similar to other things, but it is unique in its own way. Like, there are some, Lock and Key is was a good comic, and it's now a show on Netflix, where people would forget things as they got to a certain age, and they would forget about the house, and they would forget about all the keys, and they would forget about all these things. Very similar approach to some things, but it's not exactly the same, right? So even when things are a little derivative, it's not like intentional. People just come up with some of the similar ideas as they go. So
Yeah.
but yeah. Well, cool. Yeah, we could go on forever, and I wish, I was telling Carrie before we got a chance to get started. Like, I wish we can jump into some of the early artwork to see what our brains were thinking with our characters back then. But even back then, Carrie was an awesome artist. So,
But
all
we
right.
were
Well,
kids.
let's jump into what
So
you got.
yeah, no, I was just on a tangent, kind of reminiscing.
Yeah, yeah.
That
Please.
I mean, we were kids. So I loved Rangers. I had an Elven Ranger. He had a spell as a samurai. We went to that. We were into samurai as well.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, I had full samurai armor one time at some
Of
point.
course.
Then it kind of slowly dialed that back. But I think I kept the katana. Because it did more damage in second edition. Sadly,
Yeah.
What motivated them. It did. Or actually, it's a ninja toe. Did 1d8/1d6 when it was medium large,
Yeah.
and the longsword did opposite, like 1d6 or 1d8 or something. I might not even have it right, but whatever it
Oh,
was,
that's
I know
right.
that
And
the small medium damage was more for that sword. So I was like, I'm fighting small medium creatures most of the time. I'd rather have that, and it was
so,
actually. I mean, that's good.
no, I was just gonna say, to don't lose your train of thought. I was just gonna, for those of you that don't know, and just came up on fifth edition or later, there was a time where the weapon did different damage depending on the type of creature you were attacking. Like, if it was a small creature, your weapon did a certain amount of damage. If it was a larger creature, your weapon did a different amount of damage. And that's what he's referring to when he means small medium. Like, where now it's just the weapon does whatever the weapon does. It's not like different for different things, but just goes to show like how even the game rules have morphed over time, right? So
Yeah. I mean, I like the simplicity of 5e, but my get off my lawn moment is it
yeah,
was kind of cool that you could, if you could have like a pike, it did more damage against a big creature. So, I mean, you really could, give you a little more
yeah,
incentive to use these non-traditional weapons, so that's pretty cool. Or specialize in kind of what you could be like a giant killer or a giant hunter, you can
yeah.
specialize in these weapons to do damage against large creatures. But
Well, it seems
yeah,
like
that's
they're
pretty cool.
moving back into that with some of the new stuff with the weapon mastery things that they're looking to introduce, and I think in the next version. So I think they're
Yeah.
coming back around. Anyway, I derailed your thought about like,
No, no. I was thinking, but the what's interesting about it is I was meta thinking back then. Hey, what does more damage? But I remember the kind of most I'm gonna call it like the most magical moment I had playing D&D was when I first started playing. I don't know all the ins and outs. I'm just having fun, right? But my character got this golden bow, right? And it,
yes,
it, it was a golden bow of magic missile, right? But I had no idea what that was. My thought, I found it, and I was trying to put a string on it, and you're like, you can't put a string on it. It just there's no way to put it. I'm like, well, this thing sucks. I'm gonna just sell it for gold. And actually, I was excited to sell it for gold. I was excited to get the gold. In that moment, I had no idea or
yeah,
even reason to believe it was magical, and I didn't crave magical items like that. So there's kind of an innocence in games now that is kind of lost, because people grow up in the
yeah,
video games, they grow up getting magical items like that. Whereas back then, we really didn't experience it anywhere. I'm not going to say I want to go back to those times because I'd much rather have like Game of Thrones and all that Witcher and all that stuff to watch. But it was kind of a cool time too.
No, it's true. I do think I think that kind of um, is still there in some ways with tabletop. I think that tabletop can kind of bring some of that back because anything can be anything in a game like this. And like we had the game just recently where we not even with kids we hadn't well not recently, now it's been like probably what 4 5 years ago almost now, but like when you came to my house and we had sort of the dinner birthday thing and I
Hmm.
ran the game here. And I talked about this in my last session too, is if whenever you can use physical props at the table, do it, because everybody seems to go crazy for it, right? And that same sense of wonder that you're talking about, like with the bow, wasn't exactly the same, but it was really similar when people were like opening up. When I said, "Hey, one of the people staying at the inn where you are has received this wooden chest. They received a package," and everybody was like, "Oh, okay." And there were some people that had never played before, so they didn't know what to expect. And they were like, "Okay," and they were like, "Well, can we go look at it?" And I was like, "Yeah, you absolutely can." And then I went into the other room and I brought it out, and they were like, "What?" And like that whole sense of wonder, and then going through it and seeing all the things that were in there and not knowing what they did, what they could do. Like there was that sense there. I think we can still grab that. And especially like we're talking about like what kids can do, I think we can still prompt that in a game like this too. Like it doesn't always have to be this is what the rule says in the book. Like I think as game masters we need to promote the fact that like things should be different. In a video game it's always going to play the same way if you get that item, right? But like in a game like this you could make it where every fifth time you use the sword maybe something happens, like you could do whatever you want, like it could be a little bit less predictable. So um but yeah, that and by the way, that bow thing I completely ripped off of the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon. So
Yeah.
for those that remember the bow that shot the golden arrows without a string, that's what that was. So
I mean, I watched that show too, so I don't know how I didn't remember it.
yeah. Hey, it's fun though, right? Like just the fact that like we can sit around and just make up stuff and just have a blast is pretty amazing. So
Yeah.
one of the things we've been working on recently is two things, or was for dual purpose. One is we're trying to get the word out about this Guardians of Getica setting. So we've got the website. Let me jump back over to that for a second, and then we'll come back over to your screen. Um, so with the guardiansofgetica.com, you can go there. You can take a look at some things. We've got some character art that we have on here to show, some of the students, some of the professors, and this is good. And we want to continue to do this type of stuff. And this is, in a sense, marketing and getting the words out. But the other part is we need to actually market this. So I need to run some ads and get people, some information about this. But then we also need to build some consistency between what people are seeing in our marketing materials, and then also use those same characters in our world and in the setting. I don't know if you have any. I'm gonna use this one just as an idea, just to make sure people understand where it's coming from. But you can pull up any of yours if you see any that work better. Early on, when we were comping some things up, you would put some placeholder stuff like this. I just want to pull this page up just to give people an idea of final product. What we're hoping to achieve is we are going to have the hard book, which will be probably an 8.5 by 11, about the same size dimensions wise as like a player's handbook or DM guide, monster manual size. Not necessarily page count, but the dimensions of it that we're shooting for. But that's because inside it's going to be more of the Guardians of Getica scrapbook, like a scrapbook of them collecting artifacts of the realm. So the idea is that this hardbound book would be an artifact from the world. And so it would be, like, you can see smaller pieces of paper that have been sort of pasted in and then annotated all around it. And this is the idea for that book, is to be a scrapbook that the Guardians put together collecting information that they can pass down, because again, when they get to a certain age, they will start to forget, and they need to make sure that this is noted down into the right form, so that they can keep passing this information to the younger Guardians, and when the older Guardians, the elders, come back, they can add to this as well. So the idea is having it heavily annotated by characters can draw on the margins and write things down and put notes in and things like that. So what we're trying to do is work on several different characters so that we can give voices. Again, these are all just placeholder stuff until we finish stuff out. So one of the things Carrie was working on recently is some actual character design. So for both marketing and for the book itself. So let's that's enough of an intro. Let's talk about what you got so far. What your status update is on that kind of stuff. We can talk it through.
Yeah, I mean, it's not much, right? Just see a bunch of dudes randomly. But basically, so we've talked off camera that what characters we wanted to target. A lot of these are ones that are featured in the website. So we've got. I mean, let me write them in. So my plan was to make this Artemis, the guy here, right? Then we've got Drevin, right?
Right.
So I think it's important for me that we know characters. We have character names. This is Dylan. So he's that professor guy. I'll show more of him. He's the one I've worked on, so I'll show him a little bit later. I got this little cool girl named Eve. Zarya is this kind of old, kind of cleric-y girl. And then Kanata is kind of like let's see here, is like a tinker girl. So so we've all worked out kind of loosely idea like what we want these characters to look like. So yeah, I mean, I thought maybe it'd be cool to show a little bit of the process. So first, I comp all these up. What's cool about digital, again, I would have had to do this all in line, but now I can comp all these up one by one. I've got masks on this guy, so I can hide this. So that's how I draw him up, right? And then I put Drevin in front of him. I'm like, okay, I got to cut some of this out. I mean, digitally, it's so easy to do that now, which in the past, you never could be able to do that. So I'm really grateful for the tools we got right now, right, to be able to do that. But so I did, rinse and repeat with that. I just keep building out every character. What I typically, my process is usually really loose with this. I like to get the posture down really well. And then I have like, I don't know if you can see the layers, but it's kind of like a phase 1 or step 1. So after that, I'll do like a first pass on it. So that's what this looks like. So I'm going to make this 100% for you. So I'll draw on this, kind of make it a little more rough. This is still rough, but it's it's defining the form a little more. And then I'll usually do that. So I mean, you'll see most people do this, but I'll make it like a lighter shade. I usually at that point kind of dump this one. If I feel like it's getting too stiff because I do that, I'll bring this back out and kind of talk or draw straight to the phase one again. But yeah, I'll put this on and then I'll put another phase on top of it. So this is the one that's a little more polished. Usually at this phase, you can see, so the line work's kind of okay. This is like my kind of go-to style. So for guys, I mean,
Right.
no one's probably familiar with my work, but it's really kind of line heavy. I like to kind of find a balance between like classic comic book art with kind of cartoony almost, but also like I really don't like to get really clean lines. I like to have really rough lines. So what'll happen here? It'll look like this, but I think once you put color into this, then what's cool about digital art is I will I'll put a flat layer of color, and then usually put a layer over top the line work to kind of accentuate some certain lighting. So I plan to do that with a lot of work. I've got another. I'll do a plug for another drawing that I'm doing. This is my non D&D
Oh,
one,
that's
the Moon
awesome.
Knight one from
Yeah.
the TV show. So this was the same process, right? So I started with the same process from the very beginning here, and then this line work, you see it's starting to disappear a little bit.
Yep.
So you see some of the line work starting to disappear, but at the start of this drawing looked very similar to this guy. So I mean, I'm hoping to do something a little bit similar as far as the line work. So this is going to be, I think, a little more kind of whimsical. I don't want to get too serious with it, but yeah, I think the style wise, I'm just really drawn to that. But that's me personally, right?
So
So I think as this stuff evolves, I think as we talk through it and we start to see how the product's going to evolve, I think this aligns pretty well with kind of our plans for the book. Like I've
I
got that
do.
open too.
It's yeah. It's yeah. Let me jump
Kind of
over
similar
here to my
style.
screen.
This is just kind of a placeholder for a fright, but that kind
Yeah.
of line work. You can see how it kind of work and kind of integrate with the book.
Yeah.
I think with the parchment, it would kind of look well.
Love it. Yeah, and part of this too, and just to kind of what I think is great about this is like you can almost. I mean, obviously, it would need to be refined at this level too, but because again we want some of the images like for marketing type stuff it's going to obviously look more polished, it's going to look more you know like like we're trying to draw people in, we want people to see stuff. Maybe for some of the images that in world were done by professionals, those may be more polished too, right? But like what's awesome is we're also creating these annotated, like we saw, like where kids or elders may be doing sketches, right? So like they may be sketching, for example, a fright that they saw, and because we're showing an artifact of a character in the world that is drawing something, it may be that you get to the line art level and maybe it's just line art on parchment and maybe doesn't have a whole lot of color in it, right? Like because it's just a sketch, whereas other ones may look like it's a painting that was done in the realm because it was more polished by someone else. So there's going to be some good variety, I think, throughout the book on some things. But like, I appreciate you going through and showing like the process, because it was nice seeing the other character too, because it kind of shows like here's what it can look like, but this is where it is in the middle of the process. So some of the variety is going to be there anyway, implicitly in the book, because some things will just be sketches, right? So
Yeah, and those are cool to do. Sometimes they're more fun. I find just for me
yeah,
personally, the more work you put into something, I don't know, just the less character it has. So I'm always trying to strike a balance between that when I feel like I'm putting too much attention into this, because my I could call them brush strokes, but pencil, whatever it is, it's digital, so everything's whatever you want it to be, right? But I'm always quick with that with my movements. I struggle to take my time, so to speak. So I always like to capture that, in the work I do.
no, that's awesome. And I think it's like it shows like some of the background too, right? Like of where we come from, because again it's like this comp of like I can see this being almost like an Avengers or you know an X-Force cover with like everybody getting grouped together, like it kind of has
Mm-hmm.
that same old school vibe of like this is the group, but also like the adventuring party going out, like it's kind of what you see. And the other key about this is the fact that we have a variety of different characters, but we have two distinct groups within the Guardians. We've got elders and we've got kids, right? So like I'm sure it's a challenge too to like make the elders look old enough to feel like elders, and the kids look young enough to like show the separation, because you're kind of skipping generations, you know. So I'm sure that's a bit of a challenge as you're going through too.
Yeah. I'm just going to show kind of like how you do color here. So
Yeah,
again,
yeah.
this is
Let me
pretty
jump
cool
back
with the
over.
color. So usually start with like a flat color in the background, right? And
That's
then
awesome.
obviously I'll spend more work on this if it's real time. But what's cool with Photoshop, that's what I use, is you can just to build color. They've got brushes that are like mixer brushes, so it actually acts pretty much. It behaves like paint sometimes, right? So I can change the color here. Um, Sorry, it's on a different window here. Yeah, that's right. So if I want to do a highlight color, I mean that's really kind of how I build it in.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So build it there, and then once you start to mix this together, I'm usually create a different shade there. So I mean, this is all quick, as you know, but if I start to build out highlights where I need them to be, I usually draw, and when I'm coloring, I'm doing this really rough like this. As I build it out, and then I get a rough patch, and then slowly but surely you kind of build it up. And then to be fair, I said that I don't spend time with this stuff, or I like to work quick and fast. But once I get to once I see, I see the light at the end of the tunnel, like there's I can see what it's going to become, like more explicitly. Then I mean, I usually take some time with it, but kind of
Yeah.
build out the colors here. So this is, kind of how we do it.
Have you gotten more comfortable with digital these days, or are you still? Do you prefer digital now over traditional at this point?
Well, just with simplicity, I prefer to draw on pencil and paper, real life, if I had the
Uh
choice.
huh.
But sometimes it's difficult to do, as far as not difficult, but it's just more of a pain. Kind of pull all that stuff up, and then then transfer it, because color wise, if you mess up, like if I screw this up, I'm like, hey, I don't like this guy's ear anymore. It's like, yeah, I don't like that. I can delete it. I can just do that. I can select it to get rid of it. If I want to
Right.
keep it, I mean, if people are familiar with Photoshop, you can put a liquify effect on it. So I can literally pull this up. I don't know which window this is going to go on. Let me show you. So yeah, I mean, I can pull this in and say, I like the ear, but sorry, I'm moving too quick. I don't know where it went. There we go. So I could say, yeah, I like this, but I want to make it a little smaller. So I usually don't do this with my final line work. Some artists will do this with
I
their
see.
final line work. I'm too paranoid about it, or I guess too
Yeah.
perfectionist, I guess. So I'll usually, if I do this at all with the line work, because it tends to blur it, I will go back and redraw it usually. But that's just me. A lot of people do it.
Have you
I mean,
ever
it's pretty.
done like draw on pencil and paper, scan it in, or do you
I
feel
do
like that's
sometimes.
not? Oh, do you? Okay.
Yeah, that's one thing I've not been able to do. So I don't use a Wacom tablet. A lot of artists use a Wacom tablet. I just use
Mm,
my I've got a Surface Pro that it's more portable. I can move it around. I use it as my regular computer too, so I can kind of do everything. So I draw with that. So there's a little less sensitivity. So I mean, if you see, let me do one. There's a little less sensitivity than the Wacom tablet, but it's enough that it kind of works good enough for me. So you see that. So that's the kind of line I
yeah.
can get out of it. So I mean, it's okay. You got it. But when I'm drawing with pencil, I mean, I'm cranking into it the whole time. Whereas
Right.
here, you
Right.
got to really learn how to not press into the screen so deep to get your pressure sensitivity. So yeah, I think in this screen, there's not a lot of friction on the screen. I've got like a screen protector on top of it that's supposed to simulate paper, and it does an okay job. But um, yeah, there's nothing that beats like pencil on paper for
Yeah.
me. But
I remember when we were at MegaCon a few years back. MegaCon was is a Florida just convention, and Carrie had a art booth, so I was helping or Crystal and I were helping Carrie and his wife and the whole family kind of run the booth really, and it was really kind of cool seeing how everybody was interacting with your art then. But then you had a couple commissions like that you were sketching on the day. I thought that was really like having the sketch pad out and like doing stuff for people. I thought that was pretty cool. So
Yeah, it's pretty
it was
fun.
neat. Yeah.
Yeah, the one guy wanted me to put it in his book, so it was a little extra
Yeah.
pressure. I was like, I can't mess this up, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was pretty cool. Yeah, it was fun. It was fun.
No, that's awesome. So part of this also, for those of you that have been following this for a while, this is why some of this takes time, right? Like we're trying to get to the point where we can get some pretty good. It's because this whole concept is so art heavy, meaning like we have to produce some sample stuff that people can see and get what we're trying to do with this whole concept of the kids and the elders, but also the materials. It's not a standard campaign setting guide where it's like, you know, just text the way you would see it in like, you know, Dragonlance or something else, which are amazing, but we're just going a different realm where like it's almost more of a scrapbook format where you're reading and you're getting the information, but the annotations, the drawings, the real quote unquote real world artifacts of Getica being pasted in are explaining the story of what the adventures are. And then, hopefully, we're producing some other things that people can use, because a big factor of this is the players are going to be spreading the word about the frights in a way that can be passed on without people even really knowing what they're doing. So things like rhymes and songs and superstitions and just best practices that we all kind of maybe grew up with, just not even knowing what they meant. These are things that the Guardians found out keep frights away, right? So we want the players at the table, the kids at the table, to draw. We want them to draw their own frights that they come across. We want them to write their own songs that help, you know, keep the frights away, or whatever it might be. So we want the art to shine so that they can be inspired to do their own art too. Carry on the last live stream that I had last Monday. One of the people that have been playtesting already said they've got a ton of fright drawings that their kids have been doing already. So like just the fact that we planted that seed, they're already doing it the same way we were doing it when we were kids. You know what I mean? Like, so it kind of makes me happy to know like the kids are out there, they're drawing their own fright bios and like doing all this stuff, because as soon as I said this was some of the things that we were going to be doing, they were like, oh, my kids are ahead of the game, they've already done this, they've been doing this. And I'm like, oh, that's amazing. So when we start putting stuff together, I'm going to show one thing, Carrie, and then we'll jump back over to what you are doing. But these were so this is just like, I don't know how well this is coming across, but this is just a sample page. Like, I'm like, you know, we should have as part of our thing, we should have just like some gridded old school graph paper. And like this obviously is just me throwing ideas in. Like there's no, like we should put more work into like making this look clean, but like I wanted to show it to you. Same way we could maybe do a hex. So like if people wanted to do their own maps as they're going, it's easier for them to do, because we don't expect every kid to have all the art skills to do it, but like they could fill in hex squares, right? Like it could make it easy for them to do. But then also just having some plain line paper for notes, or even I just started, this isn't even close to being finished, but like here's the name of the mission, the goal that we have, here are the frights that we're trying to find, here are the notes for that. So like even having like a few pages that are layouts for like how to, maybe even after an encounter, they can take some notes real quick before they move to the next encounter, like they're on their investigation, you know? So I think having things like this, and the idea is these would be the 8.5 by 5.5 size paper type books. It's like basically if you think a piece of notebook paper folded in half, one, you know, left and right, then you've got, you know, a fright, or not a fright, but a field guide book that we could use. So having some layouts for these. So I'm putting together some of these. I'll send you, Carrie, just so that we can start figuring out like what are some potential layouts that we could use, so people can almost like worksheets, but I don't want it to be homework for them, but like just something that if they want to use it, like as they go through, they've got a spot for maybe a picture and then a spot for some other things. I think it'll be kind of a fun way to do it. So just throwing this out.
Man.
Yeah, and you already kind of had like a note page pasted in on that one sample image too, like as a So
Yeah,
that's the kind of like,
yeah, somewhere. I'm
yeah.
notorious for over organizing these layers sometime, and then I do it so much I can't find what I need.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's one. Yeah, so like something like the one on the right, right? So like that'll give, and and so here's a good example, right? So we would be putting together a clean, polished example that's already got the writing on it, or maybe the image on it, or the sketch on it, and it looks like the same page format as what everybody else will be using in the blank page that they can fill out on their own notebook, right? So this kind of gives us into that same direction. So this is also part of the work that we're going through, is making sure that we can get sort of two page layouts. One is the overall big book that we're doing, which that's going to be pretty varied as we go through, right? And then these, we may have some more consistency on the little ones that go inside, but all the annotations around in the big book might be all over the place, whatever we want to do with them to make it exciting and tell the story. So
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it. Like, so, I mean, it's going to be art heavy, but what's cool about it is, I think we've talked about, like, each page has kind of got its own character, right? Obviously, we'll templatize it, to make it easier to read through,
yeah,
but, with what you can do and what you can achieve with what's on the page, there's really some cool stuff we can do, so it's pretty excited to know how far we can take it, the different ways, or where even this content is going to lead us.
yep,
So you set expectations up to a level, and then it's also fun to not have expectations and kind of see where it takes you.
yeah, 100%. And I also and we've also reached out to different, at least one other artist who's also very interested in working on this project, and we're keeping in touch with her as we go. Um, so right now, it may seem like this is all Carrie, and it may be a large part of Carrie's art throughout this, but when the if we fund and the Kickstarter is successful, when we actually start building out the rest, then we'll be able to bring in, we'll have funded enough that we'll be able to have the budget to bring in some other artists who can work on some of this stuff too, because you can already tell this is a lot of heavy lifting for one artist to do the entire tome that we're putting together at this point. So, but Carrie's definitely like going to be setting the direction for where we're going, and I think it's important for us to make sure that we get this right. So while we've been working on this for the better part of last year and into this year, I think it's important. But yeah, this is great. Let me jump to a larger.
Yeah, it's a good
I love the
example of kind of
sketch.
the sketchy part
Yeah,
of it. It's something we can polish, but something we could just leave it kind of really loose. I think this has a lot of action. I love the action in the lines there.
yeah. Oddly enough, we've got Drevin, whose dad is a lycanthrope in his character background. So it looks like we've already got a werewolf, so which is nice.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I'm hoping,
yeah,
so let's maybe jump back over my notes real quick. Um, so we talked about character art. We talked about some book elements. Was there anything else? I know you were kind of still diving in on stuff. Anything else you wanted to show, or do you feel like we've done enough for this session and we can kind of keep cracking next time? I'm happy to keep going, but I didn't want to
no, I mean,
move
I
too
think that's
far. If
it.
there's
We
anything
got.
else you.
Um, I think visually, I think I see in this stuff visually. I think we know like what the identity is for the book. I
Yep.
think at this point, it's like you said, it's kind of finding real content and build this out real. Get the Kickstarter up, and then yeah, go from there.
Yeah, and so speaking of that, like what we're hoping to do, there's two kind of things, and Carrie will likely help with the other part of this too. So we will have some type of sample pages like that will show. Here's a few samples of what things will look like in a polished state. Obviously, we're not going to be able to do the whole book before we kickstart the book, right? But we're going to have some samples of what it can look like, because we want the Kickstarter page and we want people to know what they're kickstarting, what they're funding, right? So this will give a chance to show enough of what everything's going to look like and feel like. Then there's also a piece of sort of information, like of the setting, like And that may be PDF down, and both of them will be PDF downloads. But the second PDF will be more direct information from a game sort of standard campaign setting perspective, right? Like we've got a ton of information that is already in place about the setting, and so we can format some of that and make those clean PDFs that aren't necessarily the artifact of the realm, but just sort of a good clean PDF of what things look like. So for example, let me jump over in here. Those again who have already yeah, so we have the working file for Guardians of Getica already in place with a ton of content ready to go about all of the different, about the settings, all of the different characters or the types of characters that you might play, from the apprentices to the guardians and elders, the history of all this stuff. We've got a ton of information that we can also provide some of this stuff in the quick start, but we'll probably put that in more of a clean PDF, have some art in it, but it won't look like the big, hardbound book version that we're doing. But for those of you that are also looking for actual setting guide information in a little bit more of a straightforward format, we'll produce some stuff. We'll have a quick start version to get everybody out of the gate from the beginning, ready to go. But then we'll have, when we finally get it together and do the full book, we'll have another version that's really fleshed out, that we have everything there. But it'll be more text heavy to kind of explain everything so people know how to play. Because I just want to be fair with that. I also created, with the help of play testers, a rule set that you can use. We have Lore Keeper, that is its own game system, a rule system that I'm just going to release that Creative Commons for free for anybody that wants it. They can use it for whatever game they want to put together. Because this again is the setting. The setting is the key. You could use D&D, you could use Pathfinder, you could use whatever game system you want with this. I think that we're onto something with the feel for how this is supposed to go. Oh, I did want to mention something. Carrie, you and I had talked about last time we met about just the feel of how do the playtesters currently feel about aging out of being a guardian, like when they get to that. Because again, when you get to, I don't know, arbitrary age, you at the table will set your own rule for that. But let's say it's 18, just for lack of a better number. Then they start to forget what they did, and now they're off saving the world as a regular character in the main campaign or something. Well, most people thought that it felt like it was a bonus that happened, because they haven't even gotten there yet. So they just, like, I think the general consensus was they were just going to keep playing Guardians until they got tired of it. Like, until they felt like their character was too old and they wanted to move on to something else. And the people were ready, rather than it being like a hard, fast rule about the actual age of the kid playing in the game. If that makes sense. Like, it was like,
yeah,
it could be, yeah. So that way it was just like, you just play however you want. I think that's what everybody landed on. If you didn't, and I'm misquoting you, put it in the comments. So, but yeah, I thought it was a good point. So, all right. Well, thanks, Carrie. We will do this again, I guess, soon, and we'll get some more progress going. We'll work on some stuff in between. Anything else before we close out?
No, I don't think so.
All right.
Appreciate it, though.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate everybody sticking with us. And we're doing this as recorded between the two of us so that we can find time to make it work. Those of you that are right now joining me in the chat while I'm chatting in the future, whatever this, I don't know, I feel like I'm Doctor Who. Like, whatever timeline I'm in right now, if I'm chatting with you, thank you then too. If you're watching this recording later, I appreciate you sticking with us. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, do all that stuff. But head over to guardiansgetica.com to sign up for the playtest so that you'll get notified whenever we have updates about all of this stuff. So, all right, everybody, thanks so much.